Good afternoon and welcome to today's Coresight Conversations Innovator Intelligence. Today we are really pleased to welcome Beck Besecker, co-founder and CEO of Marxent. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Stephen Winnick.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a really exciting webinar planned with the co-founder and CEO of Marxent. We are just going to give everyone a few minutes here to join our webinar, and we'll get started in about 2 after 1. So stay tuned. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get things started here. Before we jump in, I just want to let all the attendees know that we'll be launching a survey poll question a few minutes into the webinar, so we encourage everyone to participate in that, as well as there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your webinar screen. I encourage everyone to submit questions as Beck and I discuss all the trends relative to 3D design, 3D assets, and what post-COVID future of retail looks like given the situation. We have a very exciting webinar planned today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Beck Besecker. He's co-founder and CEO of Marxent. Prior to Marxent, Beck spent 13 years building interactive marketing solutions for Fortune 500 retailers and brands, including the likes of Target and Tesco stores. Today, Marxent is a leading omnichannel 3D design and visualization platform focusing on home good retailers and manufacturers. They were one of the early players to this space, leveraging AR and VR technologies to help shoppers plan, design, visualize their furniture selections before buying, both online and in the store. So without further ado, I'd like Beck to just jump in and tell us what his inspiration was for founding Marxent.
Sure. So like you said, my brothers are my co-founder. We've been in the marketing tech space for retail in general for, coming up on 20 years. Our first company was a content management system for targeted marketing when targeted marketing was a newer thing in retail back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But we've always been fascinated with how to solve problems in the consumer engagement, CRM kind of buying process. My brother's background is very heavy in as a software engineer, 3D, and so we were looking for the next opportunity in content management for retail. There's been a series of content management opportunities that have emerged over the last several decades, and so 3D looked to be sort of an interesting and emerging market. We got started in 2011, which was probably a good 3 or 4 years earlier than the market was ready to take on. But so it was a combination of 3D and our historical retail experience.
Great, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the reasons we're excited to have you on today is because the current COVID environment has kind of accelerated shopping habits to more contactless experience, and as a provider of 3D digital assets to help consumers design and visualize their homes, especially when they're shopping online. We see that technology more apparent than ever, and a lot of the conversations we've had on our end with retailers and brands is how they can accelerate this demand for contactless experiences. So my question to you is, looking at post-COVID and the future of retail, in your eyes, what does this experience look like given the current situation?
Sure. So we work with a number of both native digital brands. So think people like Joybird, which is an online furniture company, all the way to traditional furniture companies like Ashley, Macy's, Lazy Boy, Bob's, Jerome's, and then we also work with some of the big DIY companies in the space. So things like, we go all the way from design and visualization of like living rooms and dining rooms and bathrooms and kitchens, and as well as like outdoor decking. So just to give you a little bit of framework around where we play. What's consistent across all those categories, and one of the reasons we focused on the home vertical is it still is, even though Wayfair has done a terrific job and other companies have taken the home vertical online, there's still the vast majority, 95% of that market is still largely offline. And so we felt like if you could build a better design tool, a better visualization tool, that consumers are so into research now that they're willing to do more at home and don't require so much from either a professional and or a store professional. So our business is probably about a 50-50 split between services that we provide in the store and services that we provide through either mobile applications or browser-based applications. And it's been a tale of two cities for us. Obviously that many of the stores just shut down. We are now seeing them come back to life. So I can share a little bit of that data as well if you like. But yeah, it was sort of a tale of two cities. We had one department that we were working with, day to day, and they kind of went quiet. And then the online teams just doubled down in terms of their focus and investment to sell online.
That's interesting. So I'd love for you to kind of expand on that thought. What type of interest are you seeing in the furniture and home improvement categories? Kind of as we're seeing an acceleration of these purchases online in this environment.
So there's always been a problem with furniture online, pre-COVID, and that is the way most product is presented in e-com is sort of on a single product page, one product, in its own or with devoid of context. And so there's already been a challenge in the home vertical, which is how do I create a solution that allows a customer to buy more than one product at a time, to build a room, to complete a look, and transfer that into checkout. So there have always been like room planning type tools, but most of them have been like sample products, like for placement only objects to figure out kind of fit. But now with the cost of 3D coming down, the speed of 3D online, the maturity of the e-com checkout, you can now go from building an entire room to placing the entire room in the checkout. And, instead of purchasing a single product, purchase 7, 8, 10 products at a time. And so that's where the focus has been, which is, okay, I need to go from just sort of being a support tool into an e-commerce tool for these. Kitchens is a really interesting one. We work with several of the top major kitchen manufacturers and retailers, and that's a category that, has yet to really go online, but we've gone from, a few million in sales a month to online kitchens to like 10 million a month in the last, few months. So it's definitely accelerated. And people are home and they've got time on their hands and they're thinking about projects and all the big DIYs have remained open through the COVID. So that's, that I think their business is doing quite well.
And do you see this shift or acceleration continuing into the post-COVID environment? Do you see this sticking?
I don't think we haven't really seen, so like if you take a look at Macy's, for instance, so Macy's has about 600 physical locations. Only about 200 of them actually carry furniture. They were already on a path to reducing the store footprint. We have 30,000 square foot stores. And so what we have in Macy's is like an iPad application that allows you to design your space very quickly and visualize it up on the screen. And they were already headed towards more of a showroom model where the stores were much more about, consultation and look and feel, with the customer still being able to start at home and bring it online, or start in the store and go home and actually finish. So, and then, the emergence of, sort of virtual design services or virtual sales support, I think it will, I think everybody's kind of saying the same thing, but whatever was going to happen in the next 5 years is going to happen in the next 18 months is kind of how I look at it. But
so yeah, you brought up Macy's, and Marxent and Macy's have been partners for a few years now, I believe. And, just for other store-based retailers, how can, this type of a solution kind of help as their stores are reopening? Could you just kind of walk us through what you see as some of the, added benefits of using a 3D and augmented reality solution as stores start to open post-COVID?
Yeah, so let me describe what Macy's does. So Macy's furniture is an incredibly important category for them. It's not maybe the category that, or they call it big ticket, that immediately comes to mind when you think Macy's. You often think, fashion but it's a big category for them. They're among the top 20 players. And it's a category where they have, I think, pretty good, strong margins. And so the home category is an important one for them going forward. But what they do today is you can, most of us have seen augmented reality applications. So you can have the Macy's application, you find something you like, you could tap view in room and you could see the product in your own home, right? So that's an obvious use case for home use. The next solution they have is a web-based room planning tool where you can go from a single product into sort of visualizing multiple products at a time, changing out colors and combinations and then making your purchase online. Or you can save your project, go into the store, meet with a sales associate, pull up the same project on your iPad, and then, work with the sales associate as a, more of a consultation. So I think the biggest thing we're seeing already is that stores are trying to figure out, how do I take sales associates with domain expertise and they know how to sell and get a tool in their hands so they can collaborate remotely with customers that are coming in. And so I think you're going to see a repurposing and sort of a redefinition of what a salesperson looks like. It's going to be much more of a, there aren't enough designers in the world to help every customer with a full design service, but there's a lot of problems that a salesperson can help with. Understanding your selection and fit and best practices and going through a project checklist. So I think the biggest change you're going to see is a refashioning of what we think of as salesperson to be much more flexible, that not only can they be a resource in store, but when there's downtime in the store, or that they rotate into a service where they can be a remote professional as well. And you see this I was reading an article in China about their live streaming services. And I think we'll see, a similar kind of experience adopted here.
And just to that point, we had a question come in from the audience, asking how will social distancing / no touch policy affect their, digital UX in the store. So, wondering to that point, leveraging the technology that Marxent provides, is there a way that we can, adjust to the new shopping environment of social distancing and contactless experiences using, the design tool in the store?
Yeah, the way it has worked pre-COVID is that it's very much kind of a shared experience. And where, the sales associate will have the iPad and be working through a design and they're passing it back and forth to the consumer. And so, yeah, very frankly, we've yet to figure that out. We're beginning to sort of test and understand, does it need to be sort of a, where it's mirrored up on the screen and the customer is taking a more passive experience, or you have a set of devices that the customer can use on their own, that are designated for the customer versus designated for the sales associate. And we're putting in all the protocols around, making sure the equipment is cleaned and managed effectively.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the next, question, you kind of touched on this, but I think it's important for all the, traditional retailers and brands that are listening today to understand, from your point of view, what are the biggest challenges that these traditional players are facing in their e-commerce channels, faced with COVID?
Well, I think the biggest one is for many of the traditional retailers, it's scale. And I think it's going to be tough to compete. If you're competing on price and competing on similar products, it's going to be tough to take on the Amazons and the Wayfairs of the world, particularly in our category. So I think the number one thing you have to do is provide a value-added service on top of it that a lot of consumers want. It's interesting. There's this sort of design. Think of it as a full-service traditional interior designer, right? Where somebody's helping you with the aesthetic, and helping you make tough choices and providing recommendations. But we find that there's a huge part of the market that don't, like, customers are now so much more researched when they come in. They've gone through Pinterest, they've gone through Instagram. They already know what they like. They're choosing between a couple of different things. What they really want is almost like a guided project support. What's the checklist? Make sure I don't miss anything. Is there any other products in your catalog that I should be considering? But they don't necessarily want help with the final design aesthetic. What they want help with is getting through the project and making sure they don't have to return something, right? Or that they made good informed choices. So I think that's actually there'll be this new, I don't know what you call it, like shopping concierge, project consultation, that I think will, traditionally things that salespeople have done that now will be done remotely.
That's interesting. And so you're serving a pretty large market that is fairly dependent on the physical experience and personal interaction for their largest sales. We're talking about companies that are doing whole kitchen remodels, multi-room interior design projects that are very reliant on that physical experience. So just what are some of the tools available to them that will help them translate what they're offering in their stores in terms of their services to create these touchless online virtual scenarios? I know you spoke about a few of them, but if they were to try to enhance those experiences, what tools would you recommend?
Well, I think the good news is historically, when you talk about 3D in a selling experience, there's been a gap between creating really highly realistic representations of the products that you can use in these kind of real-time configuration environments. We've used 3D for photography replacement for a long time, but photography replacement is a static image that a customer can't really interact with. And so what's happening is that 3D, what we call real-time 3D, where I could build a whole kitchen, and instead of it looking like a cartoon, it actually looks like a realistic kitchen. So one is investing in there's another wave of what we call real-time realism happening in 3D, which is a much better representation. And that's where, most customers have complained in the past, which is, I want it to look like my product. I've invested so much time there. I don't want it to look cartoonish. So that problem is being solved by the technology. So that's one step to get you closer. And then I think the other part of that is reviews, frankly. I mean, reviews have, have sort of, and it took me a while to get there and understand this too, that people are reliant on reviews. And if you get good reviews and good balanced reviews, they'll buy the product, having never visited the store.
I like that real-time realism. That points to one of your strengths of using technology to create these 3D digital assets. The other, service that you're providing is this virtual sales consultation. So could you just talk a bit more about the growth of that and kind of where you see that going in the future? Maybe not just at Marxent, but in general for companies that are offering this 3D design and visualization. How important is the aspect of doing the virtual sales consultation for that experience?
Well, I think the first place this starts is interestingly enough, in photos. So if you think about the historical sort of retail website, it's always this long taxonomy of products, right? And it has your collection name, and it has you're the brand in this scenario, that it has your brand. And think about something like kitchen and all the different pieces and parts of a kitchen that have, sort of these arcane names that, the general, average Joe is not going to know. And so making you, go through this taxonomy and linking down in subcategories and further subcategories and try to understand how I build something that I can buy online is nearly impossible. And so the first thing that we've seen help bridge that gap is using photos rather than the traditional e-com taxonomy. So in other words, like we create photos of the products, link the products in those photos directly to the products in the database so that a customer can just simply go, I like this cabinet and I like this color. I don't care what color it's called. I just like it. And I want to bring that into my space and build on my room very quickly and easily. So the first thing that we've seen sort of help bridge the gap in terms of like a design, now that's a little more like self-help, but having the entire customer interaction be translated through photos, what they like, placing it in their space, and then learning more about, price and fit and the rest of it. So that's the first one. Mm-hmm. Then the second one is, it's not, the design consultation is not necessarily like a chat bot in the sense that, okay, you see me doing something and it's like, hey, do you need help? What we've seen actually work better is, all these projects get saved and created. And so there should be like a quick follow-up. And what's interesting, unlike other categories, you can actually look at what the customer is building. So we can go in a database, pull up the kitchen that you've been building, and I can look at it and go, wow, that's, 95% complete with a few minor edits. Or you found somebody got 3 cabinets in the room and just gave up. But you can actually physically look at where they stopped. And so now as a design consultant, you can make a decision based on the project they created, how you're going to follow up. Hey, looks like you did a great job. Did you have any problem with the checkout? Or, boy, it looks like you just got started. Would you like, to be assigned a designer to help you? And so it's not this, it's almost like you let them see how far they can go, with using new tools like designing from photos. And then once you see how far they got, then you sort of put them down the right funnel based on their progress.
That's awesome. And just during that shopping experience, and then I want to share the poll questions, the results after that, and get into some of the great questions coming in from our audience. Just one last question. During that engagement online, what type of data are you collecting from the consumer that's helpful for your end customer, the retailers or brands?
So it's very, very consistent. So if you use one of these, well, first of all, if it's a design tool that doesn't allow you to go all the way through the transaction and purchase, like you get probably 1/3 of the results you'd get if you take the time to integrate with the checkout. In other words, customers don't want to start something and then have to create a bill of material and then have to go back in and use some other checkout service. They want it to be seamless, of course. Mm-hmm. But what we see is, if you use these tools very consistently, you see a 45 to 55% increase in average order value. Nearly all of that increase is net new items in the basket. So you see 30, 40% increase in items in the basket. So it's always the rug and the mirror and the lamp, the things that you may not have thought of, initially when you're building a room. And then we see a good 25% drop in returns. And that's been pretty consistent. And obviously these big ticket categories moving online, returns are ridiculously expensive. And so anything you can do on the returns front, is impactful. So we see, I'd say across our tools, we're seeing probably, we're seeing better than, 50 to 100% month over month growth in the usage of the online tools since the COVID hit.
So consumers are feeling more confident, or they're understanding, how products are going to fit and look into their homes, which is then causing returns to potentially drop.
Yeah, I think it also has something to do with the psychology of choice, that when a salesperson makes a decision on your behalf, your willingness to sort of be unhappy with that decision, I think, could be higher. But if you're making your own choices, I think that the odds that you're going to return it are lower. And so, especially if you've invested that kind of time and energy in building a project, on average, people spend about 35 to 40 minutes working on a living room. They'll spend on average 60 to 70 minutes working on a kitchen. We had one lady do 10 kitchens across 40 hours. And so there's this almost like play effect, that it was clear that, she was probably sharing that with friends and getting feedback, and you don't have that time constraint that you have in the store. So you can, build as many variants of your projects as you want and get feedback without, feeling rushed.
And we spoke about this once, but I thought it was very interesting kind of how you could build this partnership network. If I'm a brand, leveraging some 3D assets to provide visualization, and I focus specifically, let's say, on lamps, but as a consumer, you want to view that lamp, as it looks with a couch, that you're also considering. How can Marxent kind of bridge the gap between products to allow the consumer to have a whole experience when designing their home?
Yeah, it's like you have, when you go in to do a living room, you may not necessarily be thinking about paint or floor, or you in a kitchen, you may not be thinking about doing a dining room. And this, I'd love to say we were like really prescient about this, but it just sort of happened organically where a client would see that we had another client in another, that sold a different type of product and say, hey, can we borrow that paint and those doors and those floors? Or we sell kitchen cabinets, but we don't sell dining rooms. Can we borrow that from another retailer? And so it's still very early, but we're starting to see the beginnings of this, sort of content sharing experience, which for the consumer allows you to finish the project. There's still gaps to be, sort of be where we need to bridge, like, what's the right checkout experience going to look like? But we're definitely seeing, just because the cost of content can be very high, we're definitely seeing retailers and manufacturers partner up to share content across categories. Like a decking application with outdoor furniture is a pretty obvious one.
Great. So let's go ahead and share those survey results. So just Beck, going through here, are you surprised by any of these answers? Are you invested in or investigating a 3D strategy? The overwhelmingly amount, 60% are investigating.
So that one's interesting. So not every category works for 3D. So first of all, so the home goods vertical is probably the most obvious and that's why we started there. After sort of skinning our knees on other strategies, because with the home goods vertical, you've got what you're looking for is this combination of products that have a decent shelf life, because once you create these 3D assets, you want to use them over some period of time and sort of amortize the benefit. The second piece you're looking for is some kind of problem to solve. And obviously there's the design visualization problem in home goods, decking, kitchen, living room, bathroom, what have you. And then there's the cost of the project overall. You want it to be kind of a high consideration category. You'll be spending, several $1,000s, if not 20 or 40 or $50,000 on a project. So the combination of those three variables made 3D make sense for the home vertical. And 3D's been in and around the home vertical for quite some time. But then when you look at shoes and handbags and, watches and rings, those products are much more transient, right? They're seasonal and they turn over. And so the cost of creating all those assets, plus the demands on those looking real, are much higher. So we see the home vertical is kind of the first one in to kind of get a return. And now we're seeing the cost of 3D modeling come down, sort of incrementally, each year, where these other categories can start to participate. So they're going to get 0.02% increase in conversion against a high volume is how those other categories are going to work. So it's not surprising to me that most categories are still investigating. If you're in the home vertical, you should definitely, everybody is in the home vertical has got some kind of investment going, but I think some of these other categories are still maturing.
That's great. And, number two, we kind of touched on this, thinking outside the box of touchless sales approaches and experiences. You mentioned in China, kind of the live streaming. I've seen, design consultants walking through the retail store using, like a live streaming approach to show, what furniture they have in the store to provide that, more physical experience to their shoppers. Are you surprised by any of these answers here, or do you have any, thoughts on some more of these experiences that are kind of thinking outside the box?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is the most scalable, least expensive, and near-term opportunity is probably self-service. And so, as opposed to thinking of, and there'll be opportunities with AI and stuff that's programmatic later as well. But I think kind of going back to that point of something as simple as designing from photos rather than making people hunt and peck through your catalog, is kind of the first level of touchless, is what more can we do to give customers the ability to do this on their own and make them feel good about it and confident about it. And if they can't complete it, then sort of coming on the, after the project's been, tested or tried and going through a remarketing angle. I think Zoom, private appointments, those are really high-end like services where you're paying real associates to do real work. And I think that should be focused on like real professional interior design services, but I think a lot can be done with self-service that's yet to be explored.
And that model, I would say, is more scalable versus the others.
Yeah, for sure.
So just jumping into some of the questions we've received, this one's quite interesting. And, from Coresight's point of view, we've seen that some of the acceleration to, online shopping has been driven by older consumers that are now becoming accustomed to shopping online that weren't previously. So, how can, thinking about your vertical and where you play, as the older generations become more comfortable and are shopping online, I think it's starting really with the essentials today and grocery, but, this can move over to kitchen, to home, et cetera. What are some strategies to effectively engage the older consumers that perhaps may be less, digitally savvy?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think is that whenever something like this happens, there's a tendency for us to sort of extrapolate the present, where, now the storyline is very quickly going to, what are you going to do on digital? What's going to happen with stores? Stores are already, so I think a little bit of that is probably is overstated. I think I think the stores will bounce back quicker than most of us expect, but it's just very easy to sort of paint the doom and gloom story. But I think they'll be smaller, more efficient, but I don't think their place will be gone in perpetuity, obviously. What was the second part of your question there?
If, the less digitally savvy shoppers that are starting to shop online, what are some, effective strategies to have them leverage this technology that might seemingly be above their,
we actually, our data
savviness?
Our data has actually been, we and a lot of people assume that these kind of like, iPad-based tools or browser-based tools and 3D that kind of look like, gaming applications, that it would, that, a younger millennial shopper might be the ones to use it. And we went in honestly with that assumption as well. We would talk a lot of our marketing tool, materials, we talk about, preparing for the future customer. But then we started looking at the data, and that wasn't the case at all. It's actually the use of the tools are most highly correlated with the cost of the project. In other words, if you have to make a big decision and you don't want to make a mistake, you're more likely to engage with the tools. But we've actually not seen kind of a difference between age groups, and at least in our category. It might be different in other categories, but for us, it's been pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's interesting. This question doesn't, per se focus on exactly, what you guys are doing over at Marxent, but I think it's interesting, with your background and knowledge of the space. Have you seen any, interesting strategies of how, B2B companies are using AR today?
Huge.
On our end, we've seen some things like, virtual sampling or virtual showrooms. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, yeah, the B2B, well, a lot of it is, there was a trend happening already, which was, how do I show my product before it's manufactured so I can get, orders from my, dealers. And so AR and 3D was already being used in these configure, price, quote type tools. But now we're actually seeing a lot of demand for a remote, B2B sales strategy. And so, the journey would be something like, I can't be there to physically sell with you, but I need to show you my product. We've got this application that you can download, and then you're walking somebody through their own sort of, view of the products remotely. So we are definitely seeing demand for that.
That's great. We have a few more
questions. Number one by far, office furniture.
Interesting.
I think every
helping them with the
furniture
planograms
manufacturer in
and
the world has reached out for some, because office furniture is in such high demand for home use,
Mhm.
right? And they need a better way to show consumers how it'll fit and look. So that's been that category's been through the roof.
That's interesting. So a few more questions here. You know, people from the audience are interested in some of the retailers that are using 3D today, some of the leaders. They'd love to, understand how, some of the best practices. Could you share a few of the leaders in this space?
Sure. It's Lazy Boy is actually doing quite well. So they've got, I think they've bought everything you can buy in sort of a 3D suite. So they have Android and iOS applications. They have 3D design and virtual reality in-store. And then they also have a design service where the designers use the tool to create presentations for consumers. You think of Lazy Boy as sort of a really traditional retailer, but they're one of the ones that, really went hard and fast into the space and I think prepares them for sort of what's next as well. But Bob's Furniture is really quite good. Again, they're where Lazy Boy is much more of maybe a designer type audience. They're more of a discount furniture store. So a lot of their applications have been focused very heavily online, but they have a very nice AR tool as well as a web planning tool. You got to tip your hat to Wayfair too. I think they've done a pretty good job on their solutions. Amazon has if you haven't seen it, it's called Showroom. It's a very simplified room planning tool where you're just sort of comparing 3 or 4 different things and going right to checkout. You're not kind of building your own space. But that's pretty impressive. Lowe's has some nice tools that are for kitchens online as well. Those are the ones that sort of, John Lewis in the UK has a nice remote design service as well.
So this is an interesting question here. You've mentioned a few verticals that are emerging during COVID as the acceleration of online shopping is creating a need for these visualization services. What vertical would you say has surprised you the most with the increasing inbounds?
Well, small business that's been an interesting one. That's not a place where we've seen, it's mostly been large enterprise, retailers and manufacturers that have been interested. So I'd say the number of companies that are doing, under 20 million in revenue. It's tough for them because if they want to do some of this remote selling or design tools or be in 3D, there's a cost of creating all those assets. And so I think they're challenged a bit. They can't spend $300,000 or $400,000 in creating a 3D portfolio. So that they're going to have to rely on the manufacturers to mature and take advantage of it. The other automotive has been one that we see. We don't work in automotive, but we get a lot of leads from the automotive space, jewelry, fashion, handbags. I don't know what's going on, but apparently handbags are doing very well during the COVID. And so we had inbounds from the handbag manufacturers as well. So I think those are most of the categories that we've seen so far.
And just the last question here before we wrap up. I'm sure you can talk about this one for a while, but what's kind of the timeline for implementing 3D? What are the costs, and how would you kind of, from a high level, summarize what the ROI would be?
Yeah. So if you need to build the first thing I'll use like a furniture retailer as an example. So let's say you have 10,000 products in your portfolio. In order to have an effective 3D strategy, you probably need to get about 2,000 of those modeled. The cost to create a 3D model is somewhere between $50 and $75. And think of it as the shape of the model or the geometry. Then you have to create all the materials that go along with it. So this might be leather or stainless steel, and you'll have, one material applied to several different geos, or one geo that has several different materials. So you have to figure out all that math. But you're probably talking, $250,000 to $400,000 of an investment to create your assets. That's if you're the manufacturer. If you're the retailer, odds are you have manufacturers that already have 3D assets. You just need to go partner with them to go get them. And so, and that's something we try to help our partners with as well. So once you've got that done, launching an application or launching one of these 3D experiences is really not that big of an investment. Probably 8 to 10 weeks, start to finish. The real question comes in is how deeply you want to integrate it into your other tools. Like, so if you just wanted a kitchen planning tool or a bathroom planning tool or a living room planning tool, and you wanted a service to provide customers so they could buy more than one product, but you didn't want to integrate it with reviews or pricing or have multiple languages or, maybe serve one brand, you can go pretty quickly. But the nice thing is you can get it out there and then sort of add these deeper integrations as you go. But these are not, these are, a few months of getting up and running. They're not like year-long SAP projects or anything like that.
So if you were to pull maybe 3 outcomes, we talk about the ROI or benefits, what are just, 3 high-level things that you can say have been, seen by some of your customers, whether it's increased conversion, higher basket size, what are some, 3 of the core benefits, would you say?
Well, the biggest number that is most encouraging is we see about 60 to 70% adoption by sales associates. Which I think speaks to this sort of latent demand for a tool that they can use where they sort of feel professional working with a customer, where they're not sort of sketching something out or looking through, 3-inch, catalogs. And so we're very happy to see that the level of associate adoption is so high. But then, like I said, it's been amazingly consistent that it's almost always a 50-ish% increase in basket and a 25% drop in returns. On AR, if AR is on a product page, we see it used between 40 and 50% of the time. And you get about a 20 to 30% increase in add to cart with products using AR versus non-AR. But we've got almost 3 years now of month over month data, and it's been very consistent.
That's awesome. We had a question come in asking you to play the sweet blue guitar behind you, but I think we'll save that for next time. But thank you, Beck, for joining us today. This was great. We'll have the recorded webinar on our website in a few days, and if there's any follow-up questions, definitely feel free to reach out. And thank you again, Beck, for your time today. This has been great. And looking forward to seeing everyone next week on our Coresight Conversation Innovator track.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks, team.